Hello everybody, it's the Alco Diesel Guy with a new project on my workbench, and what a shock, it is an Alco PA. You can probably tell this is one of my favorite engines if you don't just look at the icon on my YouTube page. Whatever the case, time to get this engine up and running again. Long story short on this, I got this a couple years back with DCC installed, as we see by the box, and it doesn't run quite right. As I found out a couple of days ago, or actually a week or two ago when I tried to run it, it runs appallingly terribly. My own fault for not taking a look at it sooner, but I didn't. So anyway, let's get right into it. I've removed it from its box. Again, this is built by Kato, unlike the Broadway Limited, or BLI, PA you saw on my channel earlier. I think I actually showed both of those engines. I have two sisters of them working. This is D&H number 19. Again, this is the Kato version. Differences between this and the BLI is that in addition to the fact that this was not available with sound, the radius on this is actually tighter and not as, looser than the actual Broadway Limited engine. This does not turn as sharp, which is interesting enough. One would think that Kato engines would be more capable of handling tight turns, but in fact it's the exact opposite. The BLIs are actually much more tolerant of sharp curves. Anyway, without any further ado, let me go ahead and start working on this engine to show you what's wrong with it. Let me actually take you out a little bit and zoom you out. Pardon me, it looks like I'm going to have to make an adjustment here. Be right back with you, folks. Sorry about that. I found out something I was trying to do. That was actually an experimental shot I just did there, where I was testing to see what the difference between me, my sort of doing these videos with the 60 frames per second as opposed to 30. The catch is my phone will not allow me to zoom out. My phone camera, I should say, will not allow me to zoom to 0.5 / fisheye view, which is the version I have, which is the mode I have it in right now, I should say, so you can see my whole workbench and show off what I'm doing here better to you, unless I have it on 30 frames per second. So unfortunately that experiment didn't work. Anyway, without further ado, let's see what's going on here. I've got the engine on my track hooked up to my Prodigy Express Squared. Go ahead and fire this up. Again, I have that installed on the side of my layout. It's, on the side of my work table itself, so you can't see it. It's a very small little box. Makes it practical for this sort of operation. Let's go now and type in 19 and see what this thing does, if I remember correctly. Now, I have it on the track. I have the power going to it, but as you see, it's not actually doing anything. Oh, there it goes. Now it's working. The problem I had with this layout with my layout is that it was working occasionally, and there it goes again. It has this weird quirk whenever it gets to a curve as it stops and doesn't get any juice. And I think I know what's going on here. As we'll note again, if I go right to a straight section and turn the power on, it works. Gets to a curve, it stops. So I think I know what's happening here. Let's check it in this other direction and see what it does. Again, back on the track using my rerailer here, which I have to have because that's one of the reasons why I like the easy track for this. Headlights work and everything else. Go forward. Goes forward. Well, in this case, it's stalled right there, but again, cuts out. So I don't know whether this is a decoder problem or a contact problem, but only one way to find out, and that is to take this apart and see what's going on. So let's get right into it. Cut my power from my DCC system off. Get rid of the programming track, which I will store in a undisclosed location. Let's go ahead now and take it down to 1 × 1 zoom. Now let's go a little bit further. ×3. Let me actually get some foam on this. Well, actually, no, I'm just going to take the shell off. Usually, a lot of people wonder why I don't use foam. The trick is I just simply take the shell off and put that someplace safe. Anything that's going to get damaged is going to be the shell on one of these models. And if you take that off 9 out of 10 times, you protect yourself from the damaging factors. I wouldn't necessarily say that's the only way to do this or the best way of doing it. I'm just how I roll because I find it works well for me. Your mileage may vary. Okay, let's see if I can get this thing open here. Is there any screws? There shouldn't be. This should be a pressure fit shell. Simply spread the frame shell and gently push the frame out from underneath it. I gotta also be careful here. Oh, actually, no, I don't have to worry because the coupler in the front is separately mounted. Come on out. There we go, finally. It was really stuck in there good. And there we are. Gonna put my locomotive back in the actual box for this engine to keep it safe. Again, the D&H PAs are pretty hard to come by. These, like anything D&H, you're gonna pay a premium to get one of these engines. So it's a good idea like what I'm doing here is, and this might seem like extreme to some, to protect this engine like a hawk. Because once that shell gets damaged, you're gonna have a hard time replacing it if it gets damaged beyond a certain point, or if you have to make a repair, it'll never look right quite the way it should again. So let's see what we got here. And it looks like someone's been here before me. As you can see right here, to start with, the two contact pickups focus, where this locomotive makes contact with the actual frame, have solder on them, which is not a good sign. It almost looks like someone soldered the decoder down, which is not supposed to happen here. And again, these two clips here have been soldered down as well. Yeah, this is an inspiring confidence right now. It looks like in an effort to enhance conductivity, someone decided to solder the decoder board to this, which is not how you're supposed to do this. These two contact lines are supposed to just sit underneath the board itself, and you're also supposed to isolate them, so that's very interesting in terms of a way of repairing it. Someone also attempted to bend these contacts down to put enough force on them so they work correctly, and clearly that hasn't worked. So what I'm going to do now is actually bring my power track back up here to take a better look at this, because very clearly I need to see what is not making contact, and sometimes the only way to do this is to get it right in front. Let's go ahead and drop this on the track and put my DCC system back on. But yeah, someone definitely has been here before me and has done quite a bit of work. I knew it had the decoder installed. That's why you got to be very wary. Just because something is being sold with DCC on it or some kind of upgrade does not mean that upgrade, and this goes with anything with eBay, does not mean the upgrade on whatever you're buying, be it a car, be it a computer, etc., was done correctly. In fact, a lot of times, unfortunately, that can mean that the person who did the upgrade made a mistake on it and damaged the product permanently, as I find, and is trying to sell the item to you in damaged form, and is just trying to make money off of something that doesn't work correctly so they can try again at your expense. Now, this is not to say that this is happening to every item that's been upgraded on eBay, but at the same time, you need to be careful and just note it. Because unlike myself, had I been smart enough to notice this a little sooner, I could have easily gone back to the seller and say, hey, this doesn't work like it's supposed to. I want my money back. Because this was described as being in great running order, and clearly it has been messed with, and it is not. So to start with now, as I mentioned in the front, these two contacts are bent up here, and they were soldered to the decoder. I don't know what's going on here. This goes to show you that not everyone working on trains knows what they're doing. And the logic here is just plain ridiculous. It pushes down. Admittedly, this will help push down on the contacts, but this kind of soldering isn't going to fix anything by itself. I also note if this is bad enough, I'm looking closer at these two motor connections here for the tabs. They are corroded. So whoever did the soldering job here used the wrong type of solder, the non-clean flux, which admittedly I'm guilty of doing occasionally myself, and stored this in a highly humid environment, or we're still over-soldered it with flux and did a number on the metal. So, bottom line, I've got some work to do here. So, without further ado, let's see exactly where the contact isn't happening. I've already tested this once, I know, but I want to now know exactly what's going on here. This is a really bad installation, as I've now known. I wish I had known this, but of course I didn't test it. So learn from mistakes, folks. Test. When you get your new purchase in, be it a locomotive, be it a car, whatever, from eBay, etc., test, so you can get it in for any kind of warranty it has. So again, you just saw there, as it goes to this point here, it loses power. Let's see what happens when I tap this decoder. I normally wouldn't recommend this, but because I have a feeling this decoder is already toast because of how badly it's been installed, I don't mind. I'm just trying to figure out what happened here. To be honest, I'm pretty much leaning to it. I'm going to have to do major work, and there it goes again. You see right there, if I tap on it here, I get power. So an easy way of fixing this, at least temporarily, might be to put some Kapton tape right around here to push the decoder down. This is literally how you repair a lot of these engines because of this really awkward design. If those of you who think this looks kind of familiar, you're right. This is essentially the same chassis as the P42 Kato makes goes on. The Amtrak P42s, all of them use the same type chassis. This, again, is an earlier version of that chassis, so it doesn't have the extra spacing devices in it, the extra sort of contact guides, as I call it, that have these little pieces of plastic that press down on these contact lines so the bus makes better contact with the decoder. Anywho, the flaw that these all have is that these contact lines get bent very easily, and the plastic often does not secure the decoder properly. This one is actually sitting correct, but the previous owner apparently didn't know what they were doing and just threw solder at it like crazy to try to correct the problem, and actually made a problem by bending these up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to go over this with Kapton tape and see if I can bend them back down to make something that works for the time being. What I find is with these is there's only so much you can do with them once they get this badly bent. I'm thinking right now it's probably a better idea for me to just run this chassis into the ground and just swapping it out when I find like a Santa Fe chassis which has the same color trucks, or maybe even another chassis, just swapping the trucks off on this one. Looking at here, the wheels look actually pretty clean on this, but I will clean them just to be careful. So anywho, without further ado, I'm going to work on this. Let's go get some Kapton tape from my storage facility thing over here. And again, for those of you who have pointed this out, this is actually the roll again that I have of this Kapton tape. If you look at it, there is no stick to this whatsoever. It is not, while admittedly cleaning the grease might help, this tape has no stick left in it. Why? Because it's in a very humid environment, as my basement is, and as a result of that, there is no stick whatsoever to the tape. This is pretty much good to go in the garbage because there's no stick to it anymore. You can't do anything with it. That's typical of what goes on in here. So, let me go see if I can find... Here I have another bigger roll of this Kapton tape. It's too wide to use for most of my projects, but it'll just be, well, for this if it's still sticky. Oh, it does have stick to it. Good. So this is what we're going to use. Right about there, and push this down like that. That's why someone apparently bent this light down to try to force this down. Really bad repair, and that surprisingly it didn't work. This is not sticking at all. Let me see if I have another piece here that came with one of my decoders. I think I do. Decoders will come with this tape. Here's actually a piece of it. Let's see if this will work. I usually end up not using them because I find I need to custom cut it anyway, so I'll just use my own roll of it. And I find that sometimes this loses its stick because again it had to sit next. It was stuck on a decoder its entire life before it got to me, and as a result, it's not as sticky as it should be. So anywho, without further ado, let's put this back on the track and see if this fixes anything. So I got power now. Let's see if it works consistently. Take you out again to 5. There it goes. Okay, let's go. This is a quick repair, but if it works, it works. As again, there's only so much I can do once these contact lines are bent. The only other thing I can do is basically replace the chassis. Yep, that's working. You can see the headlight is staying on, so it is me manipulating the throttle, causing it to stall, nothing else. Okay, let's do what I call a conductivity test. What I'm going to do here is, I don't necessarily recommend this, but this is the simplest way to see which truck is getting power and which isn't, just to make sure I've got this working pretty well. I'm going to take the front truck off the track. And we see that the rear is actually not making any conductivity at all, or almost none. On the front, though, we should see now that it doesn't actually work. Hold it. So the front is sort of working, the rear is sort of working, but not consistently. Yeah, so very clearly someone really messed with this thing like crazy. Those are these contact lines were actually corroded because so much flux was used to try to solder this into place. I really have no idea what was trying to be done here. I guess the idea was to solder the decoder down and keep it from moving, but that's what this little plastic hook is, and as we see here, it's not even in place correctly. This should actually be slid back a little bit further. This hook actually grabs the decoder and should press down on it, but as we can see, it's not quite in place. I don't know how well that comes up. The bottom line, someone didn't know what they were doing here and tried to rush it, or tried to just assume that this was some other kind of assembly, or either that, or this was installed correctly at one point, and to try to fix it, they jerry-rigged or botched it, and as a result, it's messed up pretty badly. This decoder is essentially dead on this, even though it does still function. There is no way of salvaging it because of what's going on here. These contact lines are also kaput because they've been soldered and they've been corroded. All of this has to go, essentially. I may as well at this point buy a chassis for this because the parts are going to cost a lot. I should see if Kato has parts and maybe get them. But yeah, this thing is going to be a big job to get done. The tape will allow it to at least temporarily function, but to be honest, it's so poor, I'm not sure I would want to deal with it. Let's see if we can press down here and yep. So right now there's no conductivity on the rear truck here. There's no force coming down here on top of these lines, it looks like. Or is it just the truck itself not making contact correctly? Yeah, this thing has got multiple problems. I almost wonder if the trucks themselves need to be, if these wheels on the trucks, not just that, but the axle pickup bearings are shot on this thing. I'd be tempted to take them apart. In order to get those apart, however, I'm going to have to unsolder it, so that's going to make this a long-term project. At least now I know what I'm dealing with. But it looks almost like this chassis I could pretty much scrap at this point, because there's so much work involved in getting it going again. And this is not to say I'm not going to fix it, but it's going to be a big project where it would have been nothing had the person bothered taking some basic precautions or has had some basic understanding of what they were doing. Oop, I just shorted now. I don't know if you heard that. The other danger you have here, because this has been bent down so far, let me go further in here. If we note that these two LED, in fact, let's go down even further to 3. This LED, as you note, has 2 exposed lines running to the light itself. By bending it this far down, it can almost make contact with the metal of the frame. So if you do this, and again, I'm not sure why, I'm assuming this was done to help make sure the light was directed correctly. What you risk is shorting this out over here if it makes contact. So it's a good idea to put Kapton tape if you're going to do something like that. Again, that wasn't done here. So again, what do I have? I have no contact from there. Well, some contact from there. I have limited contact on the rear. Yeah. So yeah, this really was botched, and I'm pretty disgusted with it. I'd be angrier now if it not for the fact that this is a D&H, because then it wasn't worth the nearly $200 I paid to get it. Because getting a D&H Alco PA in any condition is that expensive just to get the paint scheme. Because, well, just look at it. I mean, you're not going to tell me that isn't worth money to look at. And that's the problem. Many collectors will buy this just to put it on their shelves. They don't care about how well or good, how bad or good it is in terms of running. This, unfortunately, was a DCC locomotive, and I should have known, or maybe should have had an inkling that there was probably something fishy with it. Whatever the case, I paid way too much money. I paid this over a year ago, probably closer to 2 years. I'm stuck with it now. It's up to me to fix it. And I'm going to have to come up with a plan from here. But for the time being, let me put this to the side and put my thinking cap on and figure out exactly how I want to tackle this particular unit.